It's been 4 years since COVID forced Canada to close its border and restrict travel abroad. Many Canadians were also sent home from the office to set up temporary workspaces in the safety of their own homes. But for many, it wasn't temporary, and that's evident in office buildings in Canada's major downtown cores, including Toronto and Vancouver. For a look at where office use stands right now and what could influence it in the years to come, let's bring in Adam Jacobs. He's head of research for Canada at real estate services firm Colliers. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Happy to be here.
So how much, just sort of big picture, has COVID really changed the commercial real estate, the office market in Canada?
I think it's been a pretty fundamental change. Initially, it maybe wasn't clear what was going to happen, but the technology that's available now and the changes that's wrought in terms of having Zoom, having Teams, how many people have you had calling into this show virtually instead of coming into the studio?
Yeah.
I think it's just that wasn't available 20 years ago. It wasn't maybe even available 10 years ago. And that new way of work, I know it's been 4 years, but I think we're still figuring out what the implications of that are.
Yeah, it's really interesting to look back and to try to put this into historical context, because we've got a graph of yours that shows how vacancy rates responded in other downturns and the recovery from those downturns when it comes to, the vacancy in the building. So obviously the vacancy rate going up means that there's more empty office spaces, and that line that is the top line there, meaning it's taking the longest, that's right now.
Yes,
in terms of office vacancy rates.
I think in the past it was a simpler story. It was, there's a recession, it's 2 years of rising vacancy downtown, things kind of come back to normal, and if we talk about the dot-com recession, I don't know that we worked that differently in 2003 than we did in 2001. This is different both in, it's been 4 years and the vacancy is still rising, and also it's just not clear where it ends. I think it will end. I think sometimes we get a little bit extreme and say that it's just going to keep rising forever. I don't think that will happen. I think in a year or two this will level off. But this is already different than prior downturns where it was basically 2 years, 2008, or the Alberta oil downswing or .com, and then it comes back. We're way beyond that already.
When you see demand, weakening, you tend to see prices weakening, but it's a bit of a divide when you're looking at rent prices for office spaces right now, isn't it?
Absolutely. The top of the top, what we call AAA, the very best buildings, are doing great. Their rents are way up from where they are 5 years ago, and the demand is pretty strong for those spaces. These are the brand new shiny towers right next to transit, got all the amenities, best coffee, best views. There's a pretty strong demand for that. It's the maybe bottom 10 or 20% of the market where there's some questions about what is the purpose of these buildings going forward. They need a lot of money put into them, and maybe this isn't a great time to put a lot of money into a 50-year-old office.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening with some of those spaces. Another interesting shift that's been happening is the increase in demand in suburban areas for office space when, we're seeing this weakening in the urban centers, but it's actually heated up a bit in terms of the demand in suburban areas.
Yeah, it's always been the case in the past that downtown is more in demand. Tenants want to be downtown because it's closer to their clients. It's easier to hire people. That's flipped around a little bit. Vacancy is still up in the suburbs. It's just not up as much. And I think it's tied to the demographic changes we see. A lot of people move further out of town, move to Barrie, move to Kingston. It's just probably not possible to come back to Bay Street, but maybe it's possible to come back to Pickering or Oakville or Markham. And we've seen some demand there. Free parking, lower rents. There are advantages to the suburbs. Yeah.
People are not too excited about the commute these days anymore to get downtown. So understandable on that front. When you're looking ahead and you're thinking about the factors that could influence the demand for office space going forward, if there's a recession, what could you see happening?
Yeah, I think the big question mark ever since the end of lockdown was the labor market's so hot. Employees really have had the upper hand, and I think that's not a bad thing. It's just it's slowed the return to office in some ways, and it's just we haven't yet seen what happens. What if unemployment is 8% or 10%? I honestly don't know what would happen. There's also the supply side. I think it's worth mentioning. We just built a ton of offices in downtown Vancouver and Toronto because it was a hot market in the past. I don't think we'll be building too many more new office towers in this environment, so things might stabilize on that side.
Okay, Adam, great to get your context on what you're seeing out there. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
That was Adam Jacobs. He's head of research for Canada at real estate services firm Colliers.